I'm done, Clara. I'm filing for divorce today.
Is this really what you want after everything we've built?
By noon, none of this will matter anymore.
Is this truly what you want, Michael? I hope by lunchtime, you'll still believe this was the right decision.
At exactly 8 a.m., Michael Hayes signed the divorce papers. He slid them across the kitchen table without looking at his wife. "I can't keep living like this. You never believed in my business." His wife, Clara Hayes, didn't argue. She quietly folded the papers, placed them inside her leather purse, then simply asked, "Is this really what you want?" Michael nodded. "I've already made my decision." She smiled sadly. "I hope it still feels like the right one." "By lunchtime." He frowned. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she kissed their 8-year-old son on the forehead, picked up her coat, and walked out of the house. 3 hours later, Michael rushed into his factory after learning his company had been approved for an emergency $120 million rescue loan. Employees cheered. Machines started running again. The bankruptcy notices were canceled. His chief financial officer ran toward him holding the approval file. "Sir, you need to see who signed this." Michael smiled. "It doesn't matter. They just saved my company." The CFO slowly turned over the final approval page. One elegant signature appeared beneath the bank's official seal. Clara Elizabeth Hayes, Chairwoman, Sterling National Bank. Michael stared at the signature. His hands began to shake, because less than 3 hours earlier, he had divorced the woman who had secretly saved everything he had spent 20 years trying to build. Michael Hayes stood alone inside his factory. The production floor was almost silent. Only a handful of machines still operated. Rows of empty workstations stretched across the enormous building. 20 years earlier, this place had been full of life. Now, bankruptcy notices covered the accounting office windows. His operations manager, Frank Sullivan, hurried across the factory floor. "They're here." Michael already knew who he meant. Outside, 3 black vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Not investors, bank representatives. Frank lowered his voice. "They'll start repossessing equipment tomorrow if the loan doesn't clear." Michael nodded. "I know." Frank hesitated. "Should we tell the employees?" Michael looked across the factory. Dozens of loyal workers continued pretending everything was normal. Some had worked beside him for nearly 2 decades. Others had watched his son grow up inside the company cafeteria. They'll find out soon enough. 1 hour later, Michael drove home. Rain quietly covered the windshield. His hands remained tight on the steering wheel. He had spent 6 months fighting to save Hayes Industrial Manufacturing. Every bank had rejected him. Every investor had walked away. Every supplier wanted payment. The company was running out of time. When he entered the house, the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Clara stood by the window wearing a navy sweater. She looked calm, almost too calm. She placed breakfast onto the table. "You haven't eaten." "I'm not hungry." "You should eat anyway." Michael dropped a thick folder onto the table. "The bank rejected us again." Clara quietly poured him a cup of coffee. "I'm sorry." That answer irritated him. Sorry doesn't save 400 jobs. She remained silent. Michael rubbed his forehead. "I've spent 20 years building this company, and now strangers get to decide whether it survives." Clara carefully looked at him. "Maybe you don't have to carry everything alone." He laughed bitterly. "Who's going to help?" "The banks. They've already made their decision." She opened her mouth, then stopped herself. Instead, she simply nodded. Upstairs, 8-year-old Ethan ran into the kitchen wearing his school backpack. "Dad, I finished my science project." Michael forced a smile. "That's great, buddy." Ethan proudly held up a small model bridge. "I built it just like your factory cranes." Michael admired it. "You did a better job than I could." The little boy laughed. Clara watched them quietly, then glanced toward the clock. 7:45 a.m. She seemed unusually concerned about the time. Her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. One short message appeared. Board meeting begins in 45 minutes. She immediately locked the phone before Michael noticed. After Ethan left for school, silence returned. Michael opened another envelope. Final notice. Payment overdue. He closed his eyes. I can't do this anymore. Clara slowly sat across from him. What are you saying? I'm exhausted. I've failed everyone. You, Ethan, my employees. She reached across the table. He gently pulled his hand away. I need someone who believes in me. Her expression softened. I always have. No, you believed in hope. I needed solutions. She looked down. You think I don't understand pressure? Michael sighed. You've never had to risk everything. For the first time, something painful crossed Clara's face. If only he knew. Every decision she had made during the past 7 years had been made to protect him, without ever taking credit. Michael reached inside the folder beside him. He removed divorce papers already signed by his attorney. Clara looked at them, but showed no surprise, almost as if she had been expecting this moment. He slowly pushed the papers across the table. I think we're holding each other back. I can't keep pretending this marriage still works. The room became perfectly quiet. Clara carefully folded the documents, placed them inside her leather handbag, then looked directly into his eyes. Is this truly what you want? Michael answered without hesitation. Yes. She nodded once. I understand. He expected anger, tears, an argument. Instead, she simply stood, picked up her coat, walked toward the front door. Before leaving, she turned back one final time. I hope, by lunchtime, you still believe this was the right decision. Michael frowned. What does that mean? A faint, unreadable smile crossed her face. You'll understand soon enough. The front door quietly closed behind her. Michael stood alone inside the silent kitchen, completely unaware that while he believed his entire business depended on convincing a bank to trust him, the woman who had just walked away was already on her way to chair the very meeting that would decide whether his company lived or disappeared forever. The front door closed quietly behind Clara. Michael remained standing in the kitchen. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar. He looked at the empty coffee cup she had poured for him only minutes earlier. It was still warm. For a brief second, he almost called her back. Instead, his phone rang. Frank Sullivan. Michael answered immediately. What happened? Frank's voice sounded tense. The bank requested one final executive presentation. Michael frowned. I thought they rejected us. So did I. But they just called. They want you downtown. In 1 hour. Michael grabbed his jacket. I'll be there. Across the city, a black executive sedan stopped in front of Sterling National Bank's headquarters. The 48-story glass tower reflected the morning sunlight. Employees immediately straightened as Clara entered the lobby. Good morning, Ms. Hayes. Morning. She walked calmly toward a private elevator. No hesitation. No introduction. The security system recognized her instantly. Access granted. Chairwoman's floor. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive suite. 20 board members were already waiting. The bank's president stood first. Good morning, Madam Chair. Everyone else followed. Clara nodded politely. Let's begin. A giant screen illuminated the room. Across it appeared one file. Hayes Industrial Manufacturing. Requested loan. $120 million. The chief risk officer spoke first. Our analysts recommend rejection. Another executive nodded. The company has reported losses for 6 consecutive quarters. The collateral is weak. The market outlook is uncertain. Several board members quietly agreed. Clara listened without interrupting. Finally, she asked one question. Have any of you visited the factory? The room became silent. No one answered. She continued. Have you spoken with the employees? Again, silence. She stood and walked toward the large windows overlooking the city. Numbers tell part of a story. They never tell all of it. One director adjusted his glasses. Madam Chair, our responsibility is protecting the bank. Clara slowly turned around. Our responsibility is recognizing value before everyone else does. She pressed a button on the remote. The screen changed. Photographs appeared. Michael working beside factory employees. Apprentices graduating from company training programs. Scholarships funded for local students. Veterans employed after military service. Community rebuilding projects. The room quietly watched. For 20 years, this company has never missed payroll until this recession. It has never abandoned its workers. It has never broken a supplier agreement until now. She paused. The business isn't failing because it lacks leadership. It's failing because every lender became afraid at exactly the same time. One elderly director leaned forward. You know this company remarkably well. Clara smiled faintly. I've studied it for years. No one questioned her. Meanwhile, Michael entered Sterling National Bank through the public lobby. The marble floors echoed beneath his footsteps. He had never visited the headquarters before. Everything looked expensive. Security escorted him toward the executive waiting lounge. Mr. Hayes, the board is still in session. Please wait. He nodded. For the next 40 minutes, he stared through the enormous windows overlooking the city. Every minute felt longer than the last. His phone vibrated. It was Ethan's teacher. Mr. Hayes, Ethan wanted me to tell you. He says good luck today. Michael smiled despite everything. Tell him, I'm trying. 48 floors above, the debate reached its conclusion. The chief financial officer spoke. My recommendation remains unchanged. Reject the application. Another director added, the risk is simply too high. Every eye turned toward Clara. As chairwoman, the final decision belonged to her. She quietly opened a leather folder. Inside rested one document. Not the loan agreement. Her signed divorce papers. She looked at Michael's signature for several long seconds, then carefully closed the folder. She took a slow breath and said only 4 words. Approve the full amount. The room fell completely silent. The boardroom became silent. No one spoke. Several directors looked at Clara in disbelief. The chief financial officer cleared his throat. Madam Chair, did I hear you correctly? Clara calmly closed the file. You did. The loan is approved. He frowned. For the full $120 million? Yes. The risk committee unanimously recommended rejection. She nodded. I read every page. And I disagree. Another director leaned forward. If the company collapses, the shareholders will blame this board. Clara answered without raising her voice. If we reject companies every time the economy becomes difficult, we're no longer bankers. We're spectators. Silence returned. Then the oldest director slowly smiled. I second the chair's decision. One by one, hands began rising around the table. The final vote appeared on the large screen. Approved, 12-1. The only vote against it belonged to the chief financial officer. Clara signed the approval document, then slid it across the polished conference table. Release the funds immediately. The legal department nodded. Yes, Madam Chair. Within seconds, emails were sent, digital signatures completed, wire transfers authorized. The decision that would save 400 families had officially been made. Meanwhile, Michael sat alone in the executive waiting lounge. Every passing minute felt heavier. He stared at framed photographs of the bank's founders hanging on the wall. He wondered how many business owners had sat in that same chair, waiting for someone else to decide their future. The receptionist suddenly approached. Mr. Hayes. He immediately stood. Yes. She smiled politely. Congratulations. He looked confused. For what? Your financing has been approved. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? The board approved your complete rescue package. His knees almost gave way. It was approved? She nodded. The legal team is preparing your documents now. Michael closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he could breathe again. Across the factory, Frank Sullivan's phone rang. He answered immediately. Then his face changed. He jumped onto a wooden crate in the middle of the production floor. Everyone. Machines slowly stopped. More than 400 employees turned toward him. Frank couldn't stop smiling. "We got the loan." For 1 second, nobody reacted. Then the factory exploded. Workers cheered. Some hugged each other. Several older employees wiped tears from their eyes. One welder removed his safety helmet. "I don't have to tell my wife we're losing the house." Another employee whispered, "My daughter's college tuition. It's safe." The sound of applause echoed through the entire building. Back at Sterling National Bank, the chief financial officer entered the lounge carrying a leather folder. "Mr. Hayes." Michael stood. "I don't know how to thank you." The executive smiled professionally. "Thank the person who believed in your company." Michael laughed softly. "I wish I knew who that was." The executive hesitated. "The approval documents require one final signature." He opened the folder. Michael casually reached for the papers. Then, his eyes stopped moving. At the bottom of the final page, beneath Sterling National Bank's official seal, appeared one elegant signature. Clara Elizabeth Hayes, Chairwoman. Michael stared at it. His heartbeat slowed. "No," he whispered. That can't be right." He looked up. "There must be another Clara Hayes." The executive looked puzzled. "There isn't. Madam Chair signed your approval personally this morning." Michael felt the room begin to spin. "My wife," the executive politely corrected him. "According to today's legal records, your former wife." Every sound inside the room disappeared. The argument at breakfast, the divorce papers, her final words, they all came rushing back. "I hope, by lunchtime, you still believe this was the right decision." She had known. Not because she wanted revenge, because she had already decided to save his company anyway, even after he had ended their marriage. Michael slowly lowered himself into the chair. He covered his face with both hands. For the first time in years, he realized something that hurt far more than losing a business ever could. The woman he believed had never supported his dream, had been protecting it, long before he ever asked anyone else for help. Michael remained seated long after the executive left. The approval folder rested on the table. He opened it again. There it was. Clara Elizabeth Hayes, Chairwoman, not once, but on every authorization page. He whispered to himself, "She never told me." Then he remembered something. Every time he asked where she worked, she smiled and answered, "I'm in banking." He had never asked another question. He had been too busy, too proud, too convinced that he had to carry everything alone. That afternoon, Michael returned to Hayes Industrial Manufacturing. The atmosphere had completely changed. Machines roared back to life. Forklifts moved across the warehouse. Employees laughed for the first time in months. Frank hurried over. "We did it. The suppliers are already reopening our credit lines." Michael forced a smile. "That's great." Frank frowned. "You don't look happy." Michael quietly handed him the approval papers. Frank read the final page. His eyes widened. "Wait. The chairwoman. That's Clara." Michael nodded. Frank looked at him in disbelief. "You filed for divorce. On the same morning she saved your company?" Michael closed his eyes. "I did." 3 days later, Sterling National Bank announced its annual Economic Growth Summit. Every major business leader in the state attended. Michael received an invitation. He almost didn't go, but something inside him said he needed to. The grand ballroom overlooked the Chicago skyline. Television cameras filled the room. Investors, entrepreneurs, government officials, bank executives. Everyone waited for the keynote speaker. The lights dimmed. The announcer stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairwoman of Sterling National Bank, Clara Elizabeth Hayes." The audience rose to their feet. Michael slowly stood with everyone else. Clara walked confidently onto the stage wearing a navy business suit. She looked exactly the same, yet somehow completely different. For the first time, he wasn't seeing his wife. He was seeing the leader everyone else already respected. She smiled warmly at the audience. Our greatest investments are not made in perfect companies. They're made in people who refuse to quit. Michael felt every word, because he knew she wasn't talking only about business. After the speech, guests gathered around Clara. When the room finally became quieter, Michael approached. She turned. Their eyes met. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. Why? She already knew what he meant. You could have rejected the loan. You had every reason to. Clara smiled gently. I wasn't saving a marriage. I was saving 400 families. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. I thought you never believed in me. She answered softly. I believed in you. Even when you stopped believing in yourself. Those words hurt more than any accusation. Michael looked at her. I don't expect another chance. I just needed you to know. I was wrong. Clara nodded. Thank you. Nothing more. No dramatic reunion. No promises. Some wounds needed time. 6 months later, Hayes Industrial Manufacturing had become profitable again. Every employee kept their job. The apprenticeship program expanded. New contracts arrived from across the country. Michael changed one thing inside his office. He removed the large plaque that read, "Success is built alone." In its place, he hung a simple framed sentence. The strongest businesses are built by people who quietly believe in you before the world does. Every Friday afternoon, a little boy named Ethan still visited both of his parents. Sometimes at the factory, sometimes at the bank. He often smiled and said, "My mom saves businesses. My dad builds them." Neither parent ever corrected him, because together, in different ways, both statements were true. And Michael finally understood the lesson that had cost him almost everything. The greatest mistake wasn't nearly losing his company. It was failing to recognize the quiet strength of the woman who had been protecting his dream long before the world ever believed it deserved to survive.